have in mainstream media today, because they're not up in arms about this. There's no giant pieces on CNN running on a daily basis. This is not something that everybody is got on their news feed on their phone every day, and it should be. It really should be, because if you can't expose crime in the government, you don't really have a government. You have a dictatorship that's dressed up like a government.
Exactly. And you know what is done to obscure that fact that you just described accurately? There's like a pretense of dissent, right? So you have CNN or MSNBC or like the op-ed pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, where people ostensibly express different opinions and have debates and arguments, but they're in extremely constrained ranges of opinion that are permitted, right? Like, you're allowed to say the Democrats are good, or you're allowed to say the Republicans are bad, or vice versa, and that's pretty much it. Actual dissidents, people who expose what the government is doing in reality, right? Like, not the bullshit, daily, kind of trivial chatter that creates this illusion of the elites fighting with one another, but the actual underbelly of what the US government does in the world. People who criticize that, and especially people who expose to people like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, they don't have the freedom to be dissidents. The US government has succeeded in keeping Julian Assange in prison for a year and a half now. There's no chance he's going to get out of a British prison, even if he wins every one of his appeals and hearings, for at least another 2 to 3 years. And if he doesn't, he'll be extradited to the US and go to prison for the rest of his life. And absent a pardon by Trump, Snowden will be in exile for the rest of his life. And if the US government could get their hands on him, they would put him in the same place that they want to put Julian Assange, because in reality, actual dissidents, actual activism against the US government and its power centers is barred and prohibited and punished. That is just the reality of the United States, and it is tyrannical. But so many people, and like the other thing I just want to say is, the worst scumbags on all of this, like, isn't necessarily the population, right? Like, I don't really blame people who, have to go to work and work 2 jobs and have kids and are barely scraping by, which is the majority of the population, especially now, for not thinking much about Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. The cases are complicated, there are legal issues involved, and there's huge globs of propaganda to which they're subjected. Like one example is, Snowden's in Russia. You know why he's in Russia? Because the US government forced him to be there by invalidating his passport when he tried to leave, and by Joe Biden bullying every other country that he applied for asylum with. They trapped him in Russia. He never chose to be there. He was planning on transiting through, and then they used the fact that he's in Russia to say, oh, look, he's a traitor. Otherwise, why would he be in Russia? So there's really effective propaganda. So I don't blame the population. The people I blame are journalists. It is the job of journalists to defend the people who expose the truth. If you don't do that as a journalist, what is your fucking purpose? Why are you a journalist? And not only don't journalists care much about what's being done to Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, most of them, if you actually ask them and talk to them about it, will justify and defend the fact that they ought to be in prison. Because what they really are servants of the government and not what they pretend to be.
So Joe Biden